Our first session is about those trade winds of change we've been talking about and how South-South nations can forge strong and powerful alliances in these uncertain times.
Indeed. So to set the scene, please welcome to the stage the President of the Republic of Sierra Leone and Chairperson of the Authority of Heads of States and Government of ECOWAS, His Excellency Julius Maada Bio, in conversation with the brilliant Dr. Vera Songwe, founder and chair of Liquidity and Sustainability Facility and immediate past Executive Secretary of the UN Economic Commission for Africa.
Mr. President,
welcome,
how are you?
Mr. President. Thank you so much for being here. You can sit in the second chair there. Dr. Songwe, how are you? Yeah, this is your seat.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Wow, what an impressive day yesterday. I hope you all had a very good rest. And it's a pleasure and an honor, Mr. President, to have you here. Of course, in your capacity as president, but also in your capacity as head of ECOWAS. ECOWAS, of course, today is one of the biggest, most populous regions of the continent. When we talk about ECOWAS, we see youth, we see production, we see, of course, huge business possibilities and tons of opportunity for the sub-region. I think the rest of Africa is waiting for ECOWAS to rise and shine and pull us with you as we go forward. So I think maybe let's start a little bit with your vision of ECOWAS, what you see your term doing and accomplishing. How would we measure your success?
Thank you very much. And to the organizers of this occasion, I think I want to say a big thank you for this platform. ECOWAS is 50 years old, and we still have quite a lot to achieve. And I think what we want to do is to take advantage of what is available now, the demographic dividends that we have in the region, but also the critical minerals, quite a lot of that in our region, and how we can leverage those to provide for the basic needs of our people, of our community. From Praia to Lagos, that whole coast is ready, and what is needed is actually the leadership, how we translate these enormous advantages that we have so that our citizens can live above board.
Thank you. I think you mentioned three important things: the demographics of the ECOWAS region, the critical minerals. I'm going to come back to critical minerals a lot. The United States has just established that 50 minerals are the most critical. In your own country alone, there are about 7 of them there. In all of Africa, we have 24 of the 50. We are now seeing recently countries like Indonesia that have decided to move on and to begin to transform their own minerals, going from 10 times the resources that they can achieve. Today, Africa is about to explode on growth, but we have to have a base for that. How do you see ECOWAS maybe working together under the AFCFTA? I think it's the most celebrated, and probably for my sins, some of the work that we have done is, how do we begin to break those boundaries so that the technology that we see, the minerals that we have in Sierra Leone could help power today what is the largest refinery in the world. The Aliko Dangote refinery needs your minerals to be able to do better, to be able to move forward. How can we make that kind of trade work even better and more seamless?
For me, I am a people-centered leader. I believe that in all of what we have, including the critical minerals, the people are the most important, and we must invest in them and make sure that they have fit-for-purpose education that makes them more rounded in terms of their knowledge base. They are the ones, especially the creativity and energy of our youth, can only be properly tapped into if we invest in the youth of our continent, especially the sub-region. So for me in Sierra Leone, what we did was what we have called human capital development. 22% of our budget goes to education, and we have declared free quality education. Guys that do STEM courses can have free access to education from primary till the end of university. And it is this sort of preparation of our human resource that will make us leverage the many advantages that we have. Of course, we need to pre-position the sub-region in such a way that by the time the AI gets to maturity, we are not only going to be consumers, we are also going to be participants in that revolution. We have always been at the receiving end of most of the global revolutions that have taken place. And this time round, we have some of the advantages, and it is our place as leaders, not only as leaders in government, but also we should collaborate in a big way with the private sector, and even collaborate outside of our region with Asia, with CARICOM, with the other parts of the world, so that we can better use these opportunities that we have. We spoke about, you touched on critical minerals, and you say you want to talk quite a lot about it. It's an exciting development that we have quite a lot of those. The governance is what is important. How do we structure our deals with those that have the wherewithal, and in terms of the legal framework, but in terms of also how we add value to them. And that value addition must be done in Africa. That value addition must be done in West Africa. We have already started that conversation. We are in deep discussion with Seneca. They are producing gas. We are producing a lot of iron ore. And in one mine alone, we have over 13 billion tons of iron ore. We want to see how we can work together and use their gas and use the raw material of iron ore and produce iron metals in Sierra Leone. And we are in discussion. That is how we are going to benefit. It's good to look outside, but it's now time, from what we know that is happening in the world, to be a little selfish and look inside. Because the youth that we must cater for them. If we don't, they are going to bring us down. We should not only invest in them, but also make sure that our economies expand enough to absorb them.
No, fantastic. I think that's a fantastic round of applause. Particularly, I think my next question was going to be, as head of ECOWAS, could we expect maybe that all the ECOWAS nations come together and have a standardized, at least framework law, which agrees and allows for sharing of the use and the value addition of our minerals, so that we begin to do exactly what you're saying. So you're ahead of me there. So really, congratulations. I think we really want to, it's good to talk about the AFCFTA. It's even better when we see it in action. And I think that what you're doing with Senegal and Mauritania, pulling together their gas to be able to transform your bauxite and your iron ore, is really fantastic news as we go forward. But hopefully that we can see the next time when you come that we're doing this with all of the West African sub-region moving forward and pulling that together. I wanted to talk a little bit and maybe just open up. I know that there's going to be a big announcement that's later on AI and artificial technology, but there is also the request for our youth to have access, of course, to telecommunication services and how that will work and how we do open skies. The big conversation today is about data and data protection on the continent. I don't know if this is a discussion that ECOWAS is having. I know Strive is going to come on the stage and tell us all the amazing things that we're doing with AI. So I think Africa is moving in step with the best in the world, and congratulations, I think, to Strive and the work that he's doing with NVIDIA. But how can we, and you as leaders, make sure that our youth has enough of an open platform, enough access to the technology so that they can also participate, but that you can regulate the information exchange. The biggest problem in Africa today and in West Africa, I'm sure, is that our data is being used abroad. It's not being used on the continent. What is ECOWAS doing about that, and what is your strategy?
We have to catch up, and as quickly as possible. In terms of data protection, West Africa is lagging behind, I must say. In Sierra Leone, we have moved quite a lot in that direction, and we hope to share our experience with the rest of West Africa. I believe that, again, the infrastructure on which that technology is going to run is important. And in most of our countries, we have the basic that is available in terms of digital infrastructure. We must pay attention to digital infrastructure as we have spoken about physical infrastructure in terms of roads, bridges, airport, seaports, and so on and so forth. At the moment, I believe that investment in digital infrastructure is critical, and it must be inclusive, meaning that we must serve the last mile. Every corner of our country must have, be able to access this infrastructure, so that, because when the technology is available, they should ride on this to even serve the last farmer in the country. So there is need for investment in that regard, and there is need for investment in education. I spoke about fit-for-purpose education. That is the type of education that will place us ahead of the curve, that which is going to make sure that our youth have the right knowledge and skills. They are going to lead in this one. Some of us will be obsolete very soon because we are not able to catch up with most of what is happening. But they are fortunate enough to be native technologists. So we should invest further in them. And this is why human capital development is at the heart and center of everything that is going on. Call it beneficiation, call it integration, call it security. We must address human capital development on the continent, especially in West Africa.
Fantastic. I think that's part of the conversation that we want to have is, of course, I cannot ask the question without talking about, when you talk about human capital development, gender, and what we're doing, particularly in the STEM and the female, in making sure that there is more women that are also benefiting from both the AI, but general human capital development. So let me just ask you your strategy for girls' education, universities. What are you doing on that agenda? I know you have a strong, and every time you talk to me about that. So maybe just an opportunity to tell us a little bit about that nexus of the work that you're doing.
We are very bullish about making sure that the women are part of everything that we are doing. Inclusivity, especially gender. We've passed a series of laws that support, create the enabling environment to be part of what we are doing. I spoke about our STEM policy, which allow girls to go to school till the end of university without paying at all. And as a result of that policy, for the first time in nearly 200 years of our university's history, we had more women applying for engineering than at any other time in its 200 years history.
It is impossible until it is done, and the president is doing it and showing us that it is very possible. I think when we talk about women on the continent, it is not, it's not even possible to talk about it without talking about the risk and the vulnerabilities that many of our women face, particularly in West Africa today because of conflict. So maybe, again, as leader of ECOWAS, one of the things that we want to talk about, and I don't know if Binta Diop is here, but Of course, the DSG yesterday, I'm sure, spoke about it, but they've been leading this campaign around sort of women, peace, and security, and trying to make sure that, you know, peace is the undertone and the fabric of what Africa should be for its women, for its youth, and of course for all of its population. But how do you see, I think we're all looking, we're all watching, we all want West Africa to succeed, but we see some of the stresses that are sort of pressuring that part of the continent today. What is your vision for how we can begin to solve it, if not solve it altogether?
In Sierra Leone, what we have done is to make sure that our girls are protected. When you talk about women of substance who are going to be a meaningful part of national development, you have to nurture them. We have put them in a special category wherein the state itself is involved in making sure that girls are protected. We have the Prevention of Child Marriage Act, which has come into force. We have special laws. We have made penalties even stiffer for rape. I had to declare a national emergency on rape. And now we have established a one-stop shop in most parts of the country wherever there is an incident, you only go there and you get all the necessary support from psychosocial to medical and all of that. So, and the punishment is stiffer now. So there is a risk. There is still, that we still have challenges in that regard.
What about in the whole ECOWAS region? I think we can't talk about ECOWAS without talking about the tensions in the region. How do we hopefully maybe to see how we bring back the other countries into the fold, but what is the progress with conversations on?
Well, 50 years on, ECOWAS was beginning to fracture. But I think I have what it takes to bring it back together. I have started a tour. I've started a tour of the 3 countries that have decided to go their own way. And I've told them in no uncertain terms, my background is military, and these are all military men. And I've told them, I've been where you are. 30 years ago, you have to listen to me. I know what your fears are, and the best way out of this that is more honorable for you is to make sure that we transition to democratic governance. So I'm finding a way to get them. And last week, I was actually in Burkina Faso.
On that note of transitioning to democratic governance from a military man, I am also being told that it is time for us to transition to the next session.
Okay.
So we will follow those orders. We really hope that you are able to bring peace to the West Africa region, and so that all the positive things we've spoken about, we can see the fruition of them very soon and the next time we have you on stage. Once again, thank you so much for joining Unstoppable Africa, and it's a pleasure to have you on stage, Mr. President.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency, President Julius Maada Bio and Dr. Vera Songwe for those invaluable insights. Ladies and gentlemen, we now turn to an incredible panel of experts. Dr. Anthony Costa, Head of Secretariat B20 South Africa, Mr. Pamela Coke Hamilton, Executive Director of the International Trade Center, ITC, Mr. Alain Kilavuka, Group Managing Director and CEO at Kenya Airways, and to guide this entire crucial discussion, joining us on stage, crucial discussion on the new multipolar order, please welcome the CEO of Development Reimagined, Ms. Hannah Ryder.
Okay, I'm going to do another good morning, everybody. Good morning. Okay, so we are here for a discussion in particular on South-South cooperation and Africa's agency in South-South alliances. Quite often, we think about Africa's partnerships with other countries from the other country's perspective. You know, it's always, what does China want? What does the US want? What does the Brazil want? Today, we're thinking about it from the other perspective. And we are also going to be thinking about it and talking about it from a business perspective. So we have three amazing panelists to help us think through these issues and how Africa can get the most from South-South alliances. And I'm going to ask Pamela, you first, as head of ITC, International Trade Center. We are being encouraged to diversify our relationships and to move and work with more South partners. Do they really offer that much? Should we still be looking at US, Europe as much, or how much do Global South partners really offer the African continent?
Thanks very much. It's great to be here. I always like to be at Unstoppable Africa. I love the vibe, love the music, love the energy. First of all, let me just say this. The issue of South-South alliances and South-South trade is not new. This has been well over 50, 60 years. Frankly, it began as early as when we were all in the pre-independence, post-colonialism movement, and it started then. The issue of South-South investment and trade is critical, and it's something that we have to really understand and take more seriously. There have been traditional mechanisms set up for decades, some centuries, let's put it that way. But right now, if we look at the context within which we are currently engaging, the need to diversify markets, alliances, and investment flows has become even more critical than ever. Because we've seen what has happened with respect to the tariffs, with respect to the fall in ODA, with respect to the shuttering of particular modes of delivery. And so it becomes incumbent on Africa to ensure that the investment that is coming in also benefits Africa in a very clear way. So we're looking, for example, at investments from places like Korea, UAE, South America. There are linkages that can be made on the critical raw materials with South America, which nobody talks about. There are linkages which are going to be made with Korea, Indonesia, other countries with palm oil and other parts of the agribusiness food chain. In other words, Africa is not a recipient. It's actually the center, and I think it's a mindset issue. Africa needs to not believe that it is asking. They want it. I mean, Africa needs to understand that it's the prize. You know, like a girl,
yes.
You're the prize. They want you.
We're the prize, yes, absolutely.
And so, if they want you, then they have to understand that there's a price and that there is something that can be gained from this alliance. Mm-hmm. So I'll stop there.
Alan, is this your experience with Kenya Airways? You've been expanding routes. You just negotiated something with a renegotiation with China into more cities in China, more cities on the continent. Do you feel that we are, as Africans, making the most of these new partnerships? How do we do that even better? Can we be the prize?
Yeah, so good morning, and very nice being here as well. So the question is, are we making the best of this opportunity? The answer is no. We can do a lot better. 40%, 45% of traffic, at least air traffic, comes from Asia, larger Asia, Far East Asia, either to Africa or through Africa. There's also a corridor that comes from Asia all the way to Latin America, which has to come through Africa. That is the shortest and cheapest route to follow. So that route is very easy to develop, much cheaper to develop, and will increase and encourage trade between the Far East, and Latin America. So Africa has an opportunity to create a hub that supports the growth of the South-South trade ties, particularly from Asia to all the way to Latin America. So no, we are not taking full advantage of that. And one way of doing it, which is one of the big themes that we'll be talking to, is how do we as Africa approach this market in a more integrated manner? And that meaning that how do Africa present this bride that Pam was talking to? This bride, for it to be more attractive, it has to be more unified. That way it's more healthy. That way it's more attractive. So for me, no, we don't have opportunities. There's also opportunities around education and skill development. So we're looking for skill development in Africa. Yesterday we said we have possibly a youth bulge, which could be a youth dividend, but it has to be an educated youth. That's what Professor Sachs was saying yesterday. So the fastest and easiest way to do that is through cooperation of skill development, particularly from, I would say, Asia, generally.
Right. And we've seen more and more African countries join different alliances in the global south. We've seen, in particular, we've got G20 has now also been part of a sort of long string of global south partners, and now South Africa is the head of the G20, the president of G20, and also putting Africa at the forefront. Is there still more integration that we need to do in order to make the most of these opportunities? Do you see private sector, our African private sector, working together more sort of intentionally, cohesively, to get the right outcomes out of G20 meetings? Alan, Anthony.
Thanks, Hannah, and thank you for inviting the Business 20 here. So we are the official engagement platform for the G20 under South Africa's G20 presidency. And we're very conscious of the fact that we are the fourth and the last in the cycle of the Global South. So following particularly from Indonesia, India, and now Brazil, and we have sought to expand and develop on the work undertaken by Brazil, but to do so not just from a South African perspective, to do so from an African perspective, and we followed South Africa's G20 presidency in terms of putting Africa at the forefront of this G20, but also to make sure that it speaks to the needs of business across the G20 generally. So we've been very clear that Africa's economic development is not an African priority, it's not a global South priority, it's an international economic priority. There's no growth in the future without African growth. It's the least developed, it'll have the biggest population. We've spoken about the youth, about the opportunities, and we've been really surprised and pleased by the engagement and the interaction. And I think the opportunity is to develop within Africa, particularly through the African Continental Free Trade Area, through some of our South-South partnerships, as well as partnerships with the developed world. And certainly countries that Pamela already mentioned, but recently Japan hosted TCAD9. There were several African heads of state, a huge delegation of African and Japanese business. So partners that have not traditionally traded or invested heavily with the continent are now looking at it anew, and it's really up to us to harmonize our regulatory frameworks, implement the sort of policies that makes it easier to do business within the continent, as well as with our new external partners.
Pamela, I saw you nodding your head quite strongly to the point around kind of how Africa's growth is an international story and an international need. But how realistic is it that we're going to be, so intentional, coordinated, to work more intentionally with these partners? Do you see that really happening in practice?
Well, I wouldn't be here if I didn't. I mean, it's New York. I could find a lot of things to do. The point I'm making is this. The African Continental Free Trade Area, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, and I believe it very strongly. It is the single most important decision made by the heads of African states in decades. I need to explain why this is important. If you look at the EU now, they started with 4 members, 4. They're now at 27. There's no single EU country at this moment that would have the power that the EU has collectively in global trade or in global engagement. It's more than just trade, it's geopolitical power. It is presence, it is reach, and it is dictating how other countries and alliances engage with you. And so the AFCFTA, if it is operationalized in the way that is envisioned, will not just transform intra-African trade, which is 15% at the moment, which is nothing. It will transform African engagement with the rest of the world. It will begin to dictate the terms of trade for critical raw materials. It will begin to dictate how things are done in terms of not just investment, but value addition and exports. It will change the entire trajectory of how Africa engages internationally.
But do we need more success stories in terms of, let's say, the AFCFTA or even the single air transport system? Do we need much more of that understanding about how it matters at a practical level? Could you give us a little bit of that, Alan?
Yes, so first I wanted to ride on to what Pamela has said with regard to how FCTA, how critical it is, and not just how critical it is, because FCTA is in a framework of the Africa Agenda 2063. So one of the flagship projects is FCTA. And to actualize, I think, what did you use? You said operationalize, yes, it's a very hard word. So to operationalize this AFCTA, there are things that need to happen. So for example, the movement of people within Africa, one of which is, you just mentioned it, the single aviation air transport market. So liberalizing the airspace in Africa. So maybe to operationalize either of them, it needs to be in biteable chunks. She said, for example, the EU, you had 3 members, you said? 4 members, and build it up. So when you talk about liberalizing, for example, of freedom of movement of people, maybe have it in the biteable chunks. We already have the economic blocks, East Africa, ECOWAS, and so on and so forth. Have them done in that way before you roll it out. Because you have 54 countries which have many different languages, different currencies. The complexities just build up. So for you to register successes quickly, then it should be done in biteable chunks. And we in Africa have been accused of too much talk and less action. Yeah. So if you want to have action quickly enough, then have it in biteable chunks. And yes, it is true that once you have this functioning projects, it is easier for you to negotiate with other trade partners.
Anthony, do you see these stories being told and the understanding of the AFCFTA even the impact of the AFCFTA coming through at forums like the B20 or the G20? Are people understanding that this is the key to, harmonizing the regulation, getting these success stories out and getting things done fundamentally?
I think South Africa's G20 presidency has marked a departure in terms of putting these issues on the agenda, and as the B20 we've reflected that. The African Union is a member in its 2nd year of the G20 now, and I think becoming more active, and we need to support its participation in the G20 along with the EU. So the issues are on the table. The G20, though, faces challenges. It's a very complicated geopolitical environment. And I think what we've done is we've made recommendations to the G20 from the B20, from countries across the G20, not just African participants. And those will be considered by the G20 and are part of the process. But whether or not they are formally adopted, there's an opportunity for African governments to take the initiative because the G20 show moves on. It's the end of the Global South, and next year will be interesting, I'm sure. And how do we ensure that we don't lose momentum? So both as governments, but also as businesses. And I think what we've tried to do is identify opportunities for business globally and in Africa to take action, hopefully with governments. Public-private partnerships are a key focus, but if need be, independently, and build on this momentum that we've achieved this year, regardless of the focus shifting at the end of the year.
Right. And many times, a lot of the time as well, in terms of some of the geopolitical challenges or the way that geopolitics is set out, quite often it feels that maybe African countries, we're seen as a sort of, we're just moved around versus all the other partners. Do you see that dynamic changing at all in the B20 or the G20 with South Africa's presidency? Do you see, in particular, the African private sector voice coming out more strongly so that we're clear about what we want?
I think it is, but it's just starting to do so. There's an opportunity to do a lot more, and an opportunity to use other fora, such as BRICS, the African Union, regional bodies, ECOWAS, SADC, etc., to develop these sort of interests, and for the private sector to engage more with the public sector. And certainly in South Africa, we've got a history recently of public-private partnerships to address crises on electricity, energy, and logistics. And we think if similar models can be used in countries where business has the resources, can work with government in well-governed and transparent manner, then we don't require external assistance. We actually can start to address these challenges independently within Africa.
Yeah. So I'm getting quite a positive feel from all of you in terms of, our Global South partnerships. Let's go for them. Let's put forward, Africa as the prize, the pitch, the integrated pitch with AFCFTA. But surely there's challenges. And, for example, in our trade flows, whether it's US, Europe, China, Brazil, most of the G20 countries, in fact, we run overall trade deficit, right? Part of that is because of commodities and so on. But how do we really shift, again, in a very practical way, those sorts of patterns? Are South-South partnerships the way to do that, or are we going to fall into the same pitfalls that we've done before? Pamela, maybe you can go on this one.
Yes, it will work, but there are a couple things. We have to look at the issues of the barriers that exist within Africa itself. The tariffs and the non-tariff barriers between African countries are frankly unbelievable. It's the fact that I was at the IATF in Algeria week before last, and there were people on the flight from Rome with me who came from Ghana, who came from every other country in Africa to get to Algeria through Rome. We have problems with that. That's a key issue, the connectivity issue. The third issue is investment. Ensuring that we have the kind of investment infrastructure that allows the investment that is needed to come in and to permeate. And then the fourth is, and I think it's taken for granted a lot, the digital infrastructure that now forms the basis of all international trade is not just something that we talk about nicely. It is a fundamental prerequisite to the modern trading arena. And so Africa has to, the penetration rate for connectivity in Africa is 18% at the household level. Business, pretty much okay. But the connectivity has to be addressed because there's no point talking about digital if people aren't connected. And then, of course, the electricity issues. So there are a myriad of fundamental infrastructure issues, both soft and hard, that need to be addressed across the board. But this is where the private sector comes in. They're the drivers, and they have the voices of the governments. They need to be the ones to start pushing hard on certain fundamentals that are needed to transform the economy.
Alan, I'm looking at you. Is the private sector ready? I mean, so I'll give you a bit of context. In China, there's this saying, which is 政府大胎产业企业, which is, it means that the government sets the stage and the private sector plays the drama. On our continent, is it really the other way around? Because governments often change with 5 years, etc. Is it that the private sector is going to be setting the stage and the government play the drama because we can have that long-term vision and that private sector plan? Do you think that's the means to which we shift our engagement with other partners?
Yeah, I agree, yes. I think that's a means. One of the challenges that I see there is that, Africans are very polite, even the private sector. So they don't demand, they don't draw a line and say, this is what we want, or else. So because of that nature, and that's why you asked a question around, so you're talking about private sector, and should they lead the way? Yes, they should, and they should be more assertive and demanding. At the same time, you asked whether the South-South trade ties is an anecdote to the problem. The answer is no. So we need to have, if we don't negotiate properly, like we haven't, if you don't have good trade negotiators, even with the South-South, although it's a more balanced, maybe more easier discussions to have with our South-South trade partners, we will end up in the same trouble. Same thing with, should we have private sector more engaged, leading the way? Yes, but then the private sector should be, because the 40% of production of goods and services is coming from the private sector, a lot of government involvement still. So government should be more involved in minerals. I think we were talking about it yesterday. And that way then it has a lot more say in determining, trade.
So we're running out of time. We had a very short panel. But I'm going to put one last question to all of you, and it's the same question. If there was one thing that we should do on the continent to shape our private sector engagement and private sector partnerships to be more beneficial for the continent, private sector partnerships, South-South partnerships in particular, what would that be? And I'm going to start with you, Alan, and then Pamela, and then Anthony.
No, I'll take the example of in aviation. This is my pet subject, so this is what I think.
We expect you to work on to speak on this one.
So the problem is, this is a representation of the problem we have in Africa. We have subscale sectors. In other words, the sectors are not properly developed. And so it's very difficult for us, if you're subscale, to have proper negotiating power. So how do you solve that problem? Because we are underinvested in very many sectors, including aviation. One of the ways to do it is consolidation of those spaces. Yeah. So in aviation, for example, we moved backwards. We used to have, until 2022, we used to have lots of integration within the sector so that it was scalable enough and can negotiate better. Yeah. Now we have a lot of fragmentation. Now with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, with SATAM, and many others, flagship, what that demands is, it demands for consolidation. Africa has to come together. Alone, we will not succeed. I think like yesterday, the reason why China and India is succeeding is because they're very integrated. Now, if you go 54, or even, doesn't matter, even if you're in sub-regions, you will never be able to properly negotiate a good deal. So private sector, public sector, Africa has to, by necessity, come together so that they can scale and negotiate.
Consolidate, number one. Pamela.
Invest in re-education of the youth and re-education. Frankly, throughout our old education system from the colonial days, we have to reinvent education for the 21st century. What we're teaching children now is not going to take them where we need to go.
Okay.
Sorry.
Reinvest in our youth. Anthony, you have the last word, very quick word.
I think alignment amongst regulatory systems within Africa. So if it's education, that qualifications in one country are recognized in another, if it's rules on importing, trade, that there's a degree of alignment. And I think business needs to work with governments, starting small, as Ellen said, on a 2, 3, 4, 6, 7 country block, but developing that, putting aside this narrow self-interests to see the bigger opportunity to allow that interoperability.
Brilliant. Consolidate, reinvest, and align. Thank you, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that.